Hello guys, welcome. On today's tutorial we will be learning about Xano and mainly good practices with this tool. It will be also good to hear about other processes that you might have that you won't find in this tutorial, so we all improve on our processes building under this fantastic tool. So let's get started. First advice. It's super important before you get started in Xano to have a clear idea of the database structure that you want for your project. You don't want to get started in Xano without a clear idea on the database structure. There are plenty of tools that you can use. You can use as a basic tool that is not even specifically built for this, like FigJam, where you can create a database structure before you jump into Xano. Obviously, before you even create a database structure, you need to have an idea of what the application is about, what is the user flow, a PRD document as well. Even before you get started building the application. It can be a native app, a web app, etc. Now, apart from that, don't allow Xano to auto-create API endpoints. Let me just show you here. I'm going to start from scratch completely with Xano. This is going to be called tutorial. I'm just going to create a workspace from scratch. I haven't decided yet, just create a workspace. So whenever you create a table here in Xano, let's do test, you have this auto-create API endpoints. So always disable this. That's key, that's important. You don't want this tool to start creating API endpoints that you don't know about. You want to make sure that you have total awareness of all the API that you have on your application, on your backend. Now that's the first advice. Now, third one. It's important you have a staging data source from the beginning. You don't want to be working on the production data source even from the beginning. You always want to have two data sources. So here under your Xano workspace, you will click here, you will go to manage data source and then add a new data source. You can clone the data source from live. Once you create, for example, the test data source, you can then migrate the data from live to test, just so you have some data to work with. That's key, that's important. Also, by the way, your front end, this can be Wized with Webflow, this can be WeWeb, any other tool. You need to make sure that this is dynamic, like based on the domain or the URL or something else on the front end, it hits dynamically the database, if it's the test one or if it's the production one. But that needs to work dynamically. It cannot be set statically, because in that way, you won't be able to test things properly whenever you are under production. And you won't be able to push updates properly, because it will be super dangerous to be working with the production data under your staging environment. Now, also make sure that you set variables in Xano, and also that you have dynamic flows for the specific variables. What I'm talking about. So first of all, there will be flows where you will need to create variables. This can be API keys. This could be URLs. For example, something where we have two variables for the same purpose this is something that we create on every single project, is we have the base URL for production and we have the base URL for staging. And what we do is, once we have those two variables created, what we do is we create a function that based on the headers of the request. So let me just show you, because you can get the headers from your request here. Now let me just create a variable here. Let's just call it env, where you can call the HTTP headers, and you can also get the headers this is from the Xano documentation, where you can push to the test data source or the production data source, where you have this X data source field inside your headers. So based on this, we set the variable of the URL. If we're working on the production environment, then we want to use the production URL. If we're working under a staging environment, we want to use the test URL. So you want those to be variables, because you will be using this on multiple flows. In that way, once you just change one variable, it will affect all of these functions. So that's key, that's important, be aware of that. So let's continue. Now, we also have this, don't start from scratch, on API endpoints as well. You don't want to start from scratch. Like, there might be some endpoints that you will definitely need to start from scratch, because this is something specific. But if we're talking about authentication flows, reset passwords, etc., you want to be reusing flows that you have used for other apps or something that you might find on the marketplace. Remember, you have the marketplace from Xano, where you can find different flows here. They should extend a lot. I know they will take care of this year. Now you have the snippets from tutorials from the YouTube channel from the Xano team. Also, you have snippets from our tutorials. You can also find actions under their marketplace. I know right now it's not the greatest to find actions. And finally, you can also have under your developer center multiple snippets for yourself. Like whenever you create something on a project, you can save this on your own marketplace that you can reuse on other projects. It doesn't really need to be from the Xano team. So make sure that you save those flows that you will have created for previous projects that you can reuse on other ones. We always suggest to not start from scratch for the authentication flows because you will lose time, as these flows are pretty standard. Probably you have built it before for another project. Also now you can, this will also depend on the plan that you have in Xano, but you can always copy select actions, multiple, from different workspaces. You can copy this and paste it on another workspace, on another API endpoint. So this is key as well. The fact that, Xano just launched this a few months ago, you can copy and paste complete flows. Be aware of that. Be aware of that. Now, let's continue. Now, always create functions and actions for repeated flows. For example, to send a notification with SendGrid or loops, you want to create functions for these flows where you just pass the payload and that's it, because it's pretty much the same structure. The only thing that changes for these specific scenarios are the payload that you will be sending on the email that, this specific email or template is expecting. Yeah, you always want, in this way, it's maintainable. If something changes, you don't want to be going to every single API and changing every single flow where you're sending an email. Right? You want to make sure like repetitive flows have functions, have actions. Now, create database triggers. Super important, super important. For example, let's say whenever an owner updates their business, they need to get an email with saying, your business has been updated. If you create this event whenever they hit this API, like business updated, for example, and you send the email at the end of this flow, of this API, okay, it will work great. But what happens if someone needs to go inside Xano and update the business directly from the database, or if there's another flow from another API endpoint that will update this business? You also want to make sure that this is built on the best way possible. In order for you to avoid creating, this notification over and over, you want to create it under the database trigger. In that way, even if someone updates this record from Xano directly, that by all means this is not a good practice. You don't want people to be jumping directly into the database and making edits. But if it happens, the owner will still get a notification. So that's great. That's definitely key, and not only for this flow, but for multiple scenarios you want to be creating database triggers. So think about that. Think the option that you now have database triggers inside Xano. Now, make sure that you also set up real-time under your front end. We just created a few months ago the tutorial on how to update lists from an API endpoint with real-time in Xano. So make sure that you're setting up real-time for different flows under your front end. We are already on 2025. Most apps are working right now with real-time. You want real-time updates for the front end for your users. So make sure to have that in mind. Now, also use Xano's AI support. It's super quick to get there. You just click help. Just click on assistant chat. This is an AI bot that has been trained on all of the Xano documentation where you can ask anything. So make sure that you're always reaching out to this tool because it will solve most of your problems built in here, database structure, weird questions that you may have, etc. If you don't find an answer, if there's a problem with your Xano instance, something weird that is not, you can always as well reach out to their support chat. They have a fantastic team. They always to you super quick, so you can always reach out to them. Now, this is for organization. If you want your project to have clarity, if you want other developers to jump into your project and make sure that they understand what is going on, make sure that you create multiple folders and also groups inside those folders. You don't want to be building everything under one single default folder here, or inside the authentication folder, everything where you have hundreds of APIs. You want to make sure that you create the different groups and that gives definitely organization to your project. Not only that, inside your folder, you can have groups like this auth group. The way that you create groups is following the same initial path. So if I create auth start, for example, and I save it, and I go back, this will be created under the same group right here. Keep that in mind. What else? Let's continue. Now, set a descriptive API endpoints names and descriptions. It's important that you set descriptive names for your API endpoints and also set a description. Every single time that you create an endpoint, please make sure that you set a description. In this way, other developers will know what is going on or what is this API endpoint doing. Yeah, it's always a pain to have to go into an API endpoint to understand or have an idea of what is going on. Not only that, make sure that you use tags. This is something that we use for large projects whenever we are updating multiple flows. We use tags like, right now, for example, if you go to settings, like updated, updated v3, or you can say it's under work. Make sure that you use tags, or make sure that, production, make sure that you use tags that will keep track of where the API status is. Even though I know that we have branches for the APIs, you still want to have tags under the staging branches, etc. This will keep the organization cleared. And also, this is just another step, an extra add-on that you can just use for the organization that is key for large projects. Let's continue. Now, use Lambda functions to handle large objects or really complex flows. Now, sometimes it gets a little tedious to work with objects inside Webflow. Like if I follow the same structure, like if I know to create an object here in Xano and I don't want to use expressions and I want to use the Xano default options and go here and set the values of an object one by one, like name, for example, of the user, and then I want to set another like last name, and then I need to set the value one by one. This is a pain. This is just too much work. You don't want that. In some scenarios, you want to use a Lambda function where you just create the object inside the Lambda, and the performance won't really be affected that much. It's milliseconds, so you can always return the object here, right? So keep that in mind. You use Lambda functions not only for this, but also for really complex flows. Whenever you have too many calculations going on under one single flow, you want to use Lambda functions. Don't use the standard Xano setup. Sometimes it just gets tedious to work with down the road in the future. If it's a simple flow, I definitely suggest to keep using the Xano, setup that they have, because they have really useful functions already, that you can always use without using really JavaScript. Now, not only that, now we have Lambda assistants. So make sure that you are using AI to build your flows, to clean any JavaScript issues, etc. Have that on mind too. Okay, set the Swagger documentation to private. Every single folder that you create under Xano, by default, if I'm not wrong, if I go to settings, it has the documentation set as public. Please make sure that this is disabled or this is private. It will depend on your needs. But ideally, it's just disabled if no one is going to look at the documentation, So keep that in mind. Now that we talk about AI, also, if you are going to be working with multiple APIs, I'm sorry for that stop. My light just turned off. So, by the way, if you're going to be working with, an API that you have never really looked into, like a Stripe, you have never used it, be aware that now, whenever you will be working with an external API, you now have the request assistant. So make sure that you use also AI on your flows here. So I want to create a checkout link from Stripe, and you use AI to help you build your curl here, or apply suggestion, and automatically, you have the whole object set and ready just for you to just set your secret key. So that's super cool. Now, let's continue. Also, set up the course policy for each folder. Make sure that also the only IP addresses or domains that can hit your folders, so not every server can hit your folders or API endpoints. You need to set your course policies. So go to course management, go to custom, and make sure that you set origins where you want your API endpoints to be hit from. We always set 2 servers, not only for the projects. We set the Wized server, well, three domains. The Wized domain, that is the Wized server, the staging URL from Webflow, and the production URL. So those 3, and that way we can work with Wized, we can work under the staging domain, and we can also work from the production side. And so if someone wants to hit our API endpoints from our server, from our website, from Postman, for example, they won't be able to. Be aware of that. Now, enable functions and actions history. By default, Xano disables the function history. So whenever you create a new function, let's do test, save this, make sure that you go to your settings and you enable the request history. Keep that in mind. You can set it to store all statements, 100 statements, that's fine. But keep that in mind, because you want to be able to debug issues, and some issues might happen inside a function or inside an action. So make sure that you have this enabled. And those have been our suggestions, our advices for you guys to build inside Xano. I hope you guys like this tutorial. I hope it's useful. I hope it's worth this 16 minutes that you guys have been watching this tutorial. So please leave in the comments suggestions and advices that you think other people should know about, that we should be setting up under our projects. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.